Hi everybody, session 3 now of our series that we're doing, and we're going to talk today about the father wound. So I've called it the father wound, and of course our setting today is we're in Isabel's courtyard, right next to the church. Church is often seen by Christians as a place of encounter, a place where we meet together to worship God and obviously to encounter God, to experience God. And one of the things that we experience God for is healing. One of the things that Jesus was known for during his earthly ministry was healing people. And of course that remains an intrinsic part of the church's ministry today. And I would say not just healing in terms of physical healing, but emotional healing, psychological healing, in all kinds of dimensions of life. Jesus is known for meeting with people and having a distinct effect upon them. You know, there are generations of men today who do not know how to father. We live in a time where, because of media particularly, there are all kinds of voices. It's a fact now that many young men particularly, the highest suicide rates now are amongst young men. Young men are confused. They don't know who they are. I attend a gym now every day, and I see young men up in the gym trying to become an image that really is doubtful whether they will ever reach that, whether they'll ever achieve it. And again, it's all about creating this image. Many young men who don't know which voice to listen to, because there are so many demanding our attention. Of course, it's not just young men this affects, but we're talking particularly within the context of men. There's an incident that happens for Jesus, which you'll find in Matthew chapter 3, verse 17, one of the places that you'll find this. And of course, it's during the time of his baptism. And this is what is said by God. "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." And an incident like this happens again in Christ's life as well, at his transfiguration. When he's on that mountaintop with his disciples, once again Jesus is validated by the voice of his Father. And "this is my Son" simply denotes identity. This is who he is. This is who Jesus is. He is my Son. That's his identity. "Whom I love," that's his position with me, his Father. "And I'm well pleased with him." And therein lies validation in identity and in purpose and role. You know, initiation, male initiation and male validation has been a subject that's fascinated me for years. I used to travel an awful lot in East Africa, particularly from Uganda, Kenya and Tanzania, mainly Tanzania. But when I was in Kenya, on one occasion, I remember talking with a young Maasai warrior who was telling me how he was initiated into his manhood. And to cut a long story short, really it was about a group of men from the village coming to his hut where he lived with his mother, and the men were singing in Swahili, and the song was all about the young man coming to join them. He would have only been about 10 years old at this time. And eventually he comes to the doorway of the hut, and his mother makes a show of trying to stop him. And for the mother, she knows exactly what's happening. It's all a bit of a play, really, a role play. But for the son, it's very real for him. And he eventually breaks away from his mother and joins the men of the village, and they take him away to be initiated. In his case, it was some cuts on his face that he had. And then he had to go off and kill a wild animal on his own with just his spear. And this proved to the village that he was now a man, that he was able to provide, he was able to do the things that were expected of a young Maasai warrior. And of course he would then join the community of the men, and through that he would attain some kind of validation. If you look at young men today, they gather in all kinds of groups, whether it be a gang, whatever it may be. And in my work with young men particularly, I've known of many a young man. One young man in particular comes to mind who was telling me that part of his initiation to be in the gang was to stab someone. And it's a twisted form of something that's meant to be much clearer, much purer, and much more meaningful. If you think of young Jewish boys, I think at the age of 12 or 13 they will have their first bar mitzvah, which is a way of the community showing and validating this young man that you're now part of the male community. The father wound is called this because essentially a father informs a son, validates a son, tells a son that you are enough, you've got what it takes to operate in this world, to be on your own. In Kenya, a young man will talk about standing alone. He has to prove to his prospective father-in-law that he can provide for the father-in-law's daughter, that he can build a home, that he can provide cattle, that he can feed her, that he can nurture her and look after her. And if we don't get this from our fathers, one has to ask the question, where are we going to get it? Where are we going to learn how to be a man? In my own case, I left home at the age of 15. I was just a little boy, and I joined a man's world, the Royal Navy. And it was quite a horrifying experience, those early months. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. My previous work experience was as a paper boy. I hadn't even had a proper job, in the world. And so joining this group of men who were all older than me, I was the youngest in the camp at the time, was quite a horrendous experience. Ed Cole says this: being male is a matter of birth, being a man is a matter of choice, and how easily that can be misunderstood or misapplied today. Where does a young man learn how to be a man? He learns it through his father. And of course, we've all had different kinds of fathers. In my own case, again, I would say my dad was a good dad. He provided, he put a roof over our head, shelter, food, clothes on our back, all those kinds of things. But I wasn't intimately connected with my dad. And so I learned how to be a man in a context that was wholly unsuitable. And I learned many things that were not necessarily good. In talking with young men, I've listened to young men tell me about their own experiences with their fathers. And this isn't just about trying to blame or trying to put responsibility on someone else. But this is an important point. And I want you to consider and think about your own relationship with your dad as a child. You see, you can receive a wound from a dad who's passive, he's uninvolved, he's not involved with you. And what that message says to you is that you're basically on your own. You've got to work all this out yourself. And he's not there for you. Then there are, of course, abusive fathers, physically abusive, mentally abusive, controlling, manipulating. And I was always trying to measure up to my dad. My image of my dad was that he was strong, he was tough. And I knew deep inside that I wasn't. I was sensitive, I was all kinds of things, but I was never validated in those things. I was always left feeling that I've got to be something that I'm not. And I tried to attain to that. And of course, by doing that, I had to become a poser. We talked about that in our last session. I had to become someone who was inauthentic, someone who appeared to be something on the outside, but on the inside was something completely different. Because in my own thinking, I didn't measure up. I wasn't enough. And when you receive a wound like that, with it comes a message. And with the message comes a vow. And the vow could be something along the lines of, I'll show them. I'll show them that I am enough. I'll show them that I can do this. I'll show them that whatever. But so with the wound comes a message, and with the message comes a promise or a vow that you try to keep to yourself. And at 15, I completed my basic training in the Royal Navy. And I always remember on my graduation day, there was no one there to celebrate with me because my parents were just too busy at work and couldn't be there. And so I had to get my endorsement, my validation from somewhere else. It can leave you, saying things like, I don't need anyone else. I can do this myself. And I find in my own 37 years now of pastoral ministry, I've met a lot of men like that who think they've got to do it themselves. I've got to stand alone. I've got to be something that I don't think I am, because no one is validating me for who I really am. At this point, I want to say to you, as I come to a close, that in the advertisement for these sessions, you'll remember that I said I'm open to give mentoring for men, to spend time with you on an individual basis. And I want to mention that now, because in our next session, we're going to be talking about healing this wound. How do we go about that? How do we do it? What's required? What's needed? And sometimes all that's needed in a man's life is a voice. The voice of a father. Jesus had a contentious relationship with many of the religious of the day. And there was one incident where he had a confrontation with them because they were accusing him of all manner of things. And the discussion came around to fathers. And Jesus said, your father is the devil, because he was a liar from the beginning. And the devil will make up all kinds of lies in order to entrap us, in order to hold us in a fixed position, in order to put us in the land of stuckness. Perhaps you're stuck. Perhaps you're in a place where you don't really know who you are. Because that's what happens, If you try to live a lie, if you try to live an image that you're really not, you end up in a place where you're saying things like, I don't really know who I am anymore. Well, I want you to know there are people who are willing to help. And I'm one of them. If you want some individual work, please do contact me and let's start a conversation. Thanks for listening. God bless.